Today, we're going to become acquainted with Dr. Stephen Covey, the author of Success Strategies. I've talked about it a little bit, but we'll go into some of his basic uh, perspectives and philosophies about his book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. Again, as I mentioned the other day, he's got, his book is translated into like 50 languages, and I think the information I had in last week's was outdated, um, and has sold tens of millions of copies around the world. From Farrah Gray, that we just saw his video, success is on the other side of fear. I think that's an important concept, and one that I think Stephen Covey would also agree with. I think I'm going to pause my recording and let Dr. Covey introduce his own very briefly. It's only a 3-minute video, but we'll go there and let him introduce his own book. Okay, so David Starr Jordan said, "There is no real excellence in all the world which can be separated from right living." This is one of the beliefs of Stephen Covey, is that ultimately, and I think I mentioned this last week, ultimately he believes in an inside-out transition or inside-out um, success strategy, which means that that people can really count on you if you say something, that they can believe you. For example, that they can trust you. His son wrote a book. I can't remember exactly what it's what it's called, but his son also wrote a book following up on his dad's work. I think he called it The Speed of Trust. Yeah, I think that is the name of it. And he talks about how a person can destroy trust in a matter of seconds. It may take years to restore trust that you can destroy in seconds. How important trust is in everything that you do. And he has some good examples of billionaires, even that Warren Buffett is one that he got to know, and he's a billionaire from America. But I would say Jack Ma is a good example in this part of the world, somebody who people trust. But one false move, and that can be destroyed very quickly. So um, Covey talks about that sort of thing. About that is Dr. Stephen Covey, even though his son expanded it into the speed of trust. That success comes from habits that are built over a long period of time, and those habits make it part of your absolute nature, and make it so that people can trust you. Make it so people know that person would not lie to me. Um, as a father of 4 children and stepfather to 2 others, um, I can tell you I have those feelings even about my own children. I know who I can trust, um, and others not so much. Um, you get to know them, and while a father knows his own children that way, people around somebody in real life, somebody who's not related to you, get after a while get to know you too, um, and they get to know whether or not you can be trusted, and that sort of character is part of what Dr. Covey's talking about. Is that you need to build your success from the inside out. And I think I mentioned last week that his dissertation was going back hundreds of years and reading books from people who talked about how to achieve success over the centuries, and determined that recently he's seen a relatively recently, decades in history, but not centuries. Um, he just saw a lot of books about how to succeed with superficiality. making people think that you are something that you're not, and how, yeah, you can fool people for a while by acting a certain way and not really being that way. And so you might achieve some short-term success, but you'll never achieve what you're really capable of if it is superficial and not internal. Um, Dr. Covey talks about paradigms. How do we see the world? And that's kind of the definition of paradigm is what prism, so to speak, you see the world in. And that is very important as you start um, making decisions in your life. Is how do you see? How do you see your relationship to other people? How do you want it to be? Um, and as he said, some people are almost enslaved by certain paradigms. If He mentioned in this little video, statistics say that if a father is abusive to his children, if he hits them a lot, and just so forth, if he's really brutal, and I don't mean a spank on the backside, but if he's really brutal to his children will probably be brutal to his grandchildren. But that's scientific, but that's probably going to happen. Again, not 100%, but the odds are it will, but it does not have to be. That's his point, is that anybody, no matter what it is they grew up with, whether it was abuse from a parent, whether it was, I think I mentioned my two friends, Dennis and Alan, the smartest kid in our class and the dumbest kid in our class, um, and how the smartest kid became a counselor at a prison and the dumbest kid became a college instructor in mechanics, but still a college instructor. And he basically was passed in his high school classes just so teachers could get rid of him. He was not a real good reader, was not a very good writer, and so he didn't have the basic skills that you need to succeed in a classroom, the typical classroom. And so, yeah, I think I may have mentioned that to me, he's one of the biggest success stories from my high school class because he had to overcome 12 years of public education where almost every teacher he had told him he was an idiot. And that by itself is, if you're told that long enough, there is what Dr. Covey refers to as a social mirror. And as people around you tell you you are something, you tend to believe them. And so for 12 years in the public schools, he was told he was an idiot. And somehow he became a college instructor. That to me is practically a miracle. And again, regardless of even if it was mechanics, just for him to believe in himself enough through those years of social mirroring by other people that he was inadequate, that he was a failure, that he was, that he was just lucky to get passed on to the next class because he didn't deserve it. That sort of attitude to me is amazing that he could do it. Anyway, so the paradigm that we have, and some of that within that paradigm is this self-image, what we think we are. Some of it is what we see or what we think is the normal because we've grown up in a certain home to certain parents, in a certain community, in a certain church, in a certain whatever it might be. Whatever we've grown up with, we see certain things and we accept them as normal, whatever that might be. And in some cases, it may not be normal. It's not in a worldview, not in, at least in the, maybe I'm prejudiced, I guess I'd almost have to say in a Western view, that some things just aren't right by our perspective, I guess, from the West, that may be considered normal elsewhere, but Dr. Covey would suggest they don't lead to happiness if they're not built on certain principles that he thinks are eternal principles, principles that every church, um, essentially every church teaches, but not every member of every church follows. So he's gone through, along with his studies of success books, he's gone through the scriptures, the religious teachings of many churches as well, and that's he did find somewhat of a consensus of among the religions that the principles he feels like are eternal are consistently taught across those different religions. Sometimes you can have an experience where suddenly your paradigm gets shifted. Bam. It can be shifted very quickly. And I hope that during this class you all can experience some paradigm shifts because I think it's important that you look at yourself um, with kind of new eyes and look at the world with new eyes, so to speak, and see new possibilities for yourself, for your future, for your for what do you consider success to be and how you can achieve that success. And sometimes that takes a paradigm shift. This was just a comic. He became famous enough that his teachings kind of became part of culture. And so this is just a cartoon. Oh, wow, paradigm shift. Um, Dr. Covey himself went through a paradigm shift. He talked about one paradigm shift he went through. That paradigm shift, he was on a train in actually a subway in New York City. And he was sitting there trying to study some notes, preparing for a presentation. And there was a guy on the other side, sitting on the other side of the subway car, and he had a couple of kids with him. And the kids were running around, stepping on people's toes, making noise. They were just totally out of control. And inside, he was feeling like, what a bad dad. And so, being a proactive person, proactive meaning you kind of take charge, you don't just react to things, but you do you feel like you can change a situation. So, as a proactive person, he decided to talk to the father. And so he got the father's attention and said, your kids are kind of disturbing everybody here. They're running around and everything. I'm wondering if you can, rein them in a little bit. And the father, just kind of seemed kind of in a daze and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. We just came from the hospital and my wife just died. And I'm sorry. I'm not quite sure how to handle things now. Well, Dr. Covey's paradigm suddenly shifted from one of being antagonized to being sympathetic, empathetic, and wanting to help this father who just suffered this great loss. And so that's just an example of a paradigm shift. You think you understand reality, and you may not understand true reality. And so in this case, this was his reality check that he thought this was a bad dad, when in reality, this dad was just totally had his life just turned upside down. Um, there's how we see the world can be kind of broken down in the world of communications, which I'm a professor of journalism. We study these things all the time. How you perceive the world is part of how you respond to it. And so Dr. Covey perceived the world in a certain way as he confronted that father. He perceived it, um, and he perceived it somewhat accurately. The kids were out of control, but he didn't understand it. He didn't understand why they're out of control, why the father wasn't taking charge of his children. And so thus he could not interpret it properly until he got more information, until he learned more about the situation. And so in many cases, we ourselves, that's one of the most important things that we need to learn in life, and it's part of what Dr. Covey talks about in his 7 habits, is learning to withhold judgment somewhat until we understand and to seek to understand. Indeed, that's his 5th habit, is seek first to understand, then to be understood. And that's one of the most important of his habits that we will get to. He says that a simple way of understanding what a paradigm is kind of like if you go to a city. Let's say you go someplace that you haven't been before, so you get a map. Um, I don't know if anybody here been to New Delhi. Okay, well then let's go to New Delhi in our minds, and we need to get uh, travel around New Delhi a little bit. There's a famous Lotus Temple that is beautiful, very crowded, but beautiful. And so we get a map so that we can try to find Lotus Temple, maybe meet some friends there, whatever. But somebody gives us a map of Singapore, whatever, some other city. How do we find Lotus Temple if we have a map of Singapore or Kuala Lumpur or whatever, some other city? Now, in many cases, our paradigm is screwed up, and that's kind of what we're trying to do. We're trying to get to success when we don't understand how to get there. And somebody will tell us, just try harder. Come on, try harder. But no matter how hard you try, if you have a map of Kuala Lumpur and you're trying to find someplace in New Delhi, you're not going to find it without some help. And so working hard isn't necessarily going to get you success. On the other hand, I mentioned that one of the things correlated more with success in life than GPA is a positive attitude. Well, that's true. But if you have the wrong map and you call somebody up for help and they say, oh, just have a positive attitude. You're being negative. You've been looking around there, but you're just being negative. You need to have more positive attitude and you'll find the place pretty soon. Stop being so negative. Well, again, if you have a map of Kuala Lumpur and you're in New Delhi, being positive is going to get you very far either. And so there's some of these things that we find in success strategies, different success strategies like positive attitude and hard work are very valuable, but they still don't get you to where you want to go in New Delhi if you have a Kuala Lumpur map. And so you need to sometimes have a paradigm shift in order to get your head right and understand what will get you there. What kind of map you need to achieve success. I think I mentioned previously that for 7 years I worked with the Department of Education in the state of Washington. And so, my job specifically was to put out a publication about the best practices of migrant education. And so I did that job, but I got into it. I started really wanting to be more involved in the actual process. And so one of the agencies I was working with had started a program for a student leadership program. And these migrant students would go for 3 days to a conference. They would take them typically to another university and have them stay in dorms at that university or at a university. And these students, like I said, as migrant students, most of them had never really thought they could possibly go to college, go to university and get a university degree. 50% of all migrant students drop out of high school because, and in some cases, their parents are their worst enemy. Talking about paradigms, this is another example. Their parents have come up from Mexico or Guatemala or El Salvador or Honduras, someplace, and their parents in their other country were dirt poor. They were getting by. Somebody in in Guatemala might work, or Mexico might work for $2 a day. Whereas in America, you can't pay somebody that low; you get in trouble. So, they get to America, they start picking apples or cherries or pulling weeds in a field or whatever it is they're doing, and suddenly they're making $15 an hour. Well, that's more than 7 times what they were making per hour in their home country. So to them, they're rich now. And from their paradigm, they have just struck it rich. And so their kids, might want to. They maybe have been encouraged by their teachers to go to college, to go to university, and they come home and talk to their parents about that, and their parents say, "Oh, you can't go to a university. Nobody in our family's ever gone to a university. You have no clue what you're doing. We don't have the money to pay for a university. You're wasting your time in school. Drop out of school and let's come work in the fields with us. We're making such good money now. We're gonna be happy together. Just appreciate what we have now that we're here in America. So just stop wasting your time with these silly ideas." And the kids believe them. And so half of them just drop out of school and go back and work in the fields with their parents. But when they get to this, they go to a university with us, and we teach them things like we teach them about scholarships. We teach them about setting goals, and not just the big goals. The big goals, yeah. We'll talk about it later. That I learned and taught as part of the student leadership being a volunteer to help out with the student leadership program because I was so impressed by it. But one of the things we teach them is stepping stone goals, and so that's something I add to our instruction here is this concept of stepping stone goals. So you have the big goal. In their case, we wanted them to have the goal anyway of university degree. And that to them was impossible. They couldn't see how they could possibly do that. And so we had to teach them about the stepping stone goals, how to get there from where they're at. What are stepping stones? You know what that term refers to? It's like stones you can step on to get across the river or a creek. And so you take one small stone at a time so you don't get your feet wet. And so these are the stepping stones. So you have to figure out, what are these stepping stones? What small goals can I achieve that will get me to the big goals? And so we talk about those stepping stone goals and how they can get there. And those students that spend just 3 days with us in this student leadership program, of them, 80% of them not only finish high school, but most of them go on to college because they've learned a key, they've changed their paradigm to a large degree. And they've figured out, it is possible. We don't have to work in the fields the rest of our lives. We can go to college. We can be an architect or a doctor or a lawyer or whatever it is they might want to become. And so, we changing that paradigm and understanding how to do something that it can, just believing it can be done, changes the map of your life. So, as it says in the bottom of the slide, the way we see things is the source of the way we think and the way we act. And so if you control somebody's paradigm, you control their actions. If they, again, like the map, you give them a bad map, they're still going to try to follow it, even if it leads them to failure. And so that map of success is important. So paradigms are the source of our attitudes and our behaviors. We cannot act with integrity outside of them because we think that's the norm. We think that's what's appropriate. So we live within our paradigm, and that paradigm is often unsuccessful. I don't know how Fair Gray did what he did. That's mind-boggling. That the 7-year-old decides, I'm going to change my family's life, and he starts bottling. His mom has some big containers of body lotion. He finds some small bottles to put them in the small bottles and goes out and starts selling them for $1 or whatever it was a piece, door to door. He decides to make himself little business cards. And granted, some of his success was probably just because people thought he was so cute, that he was so stupid to think he could become wealthy by going door to door with rebottled body lotion. And so, yeah, maybe some of his early success was just simply because he was so young and cute. But he did, and like he said on the video, he didn't know better. And it's amazing what you can accomplish when you don't know you can't do it. If nobody's taught you you can't do it, then you can do it. And so, again, living in the under some of the most difficult and negative situations in a big city, in the poor part of a big city, depending on government sustenance and so forth, for him to then become a millionaire at age 14 is absurd. That's ridiculous. That can't be done, but he did. So, yeah, breaks your paradigm. Some of you have probably seen this before. This is a test of your ability to perceive. So you see this picture of a young lady with a little, I don't know, there's a scarf, a little head thing, whatever, I don't know, a little cap, looking off to the side there. And then we go to this one. So what do you see here? How many of you see, and if you've seen this before, don't tell anybody, let's let them experience it for themselves. How many of you see the young woman here in this picture? Raise your hand. Okay, so about half of you see the young woman. How many of you see an old woman in this picture? Raise your hand. Not so many. Part of this is by showing you the picture of the young woman, is to give you kind of a paradigm, kind of prep your mind to see the young woman in this one. Now, some of you didn't raise your hands for either one, so I think you're lying to me. But anyway, if you're seeing the young woman and you cannot see the old woman, this is the nose of the old woman. This is the old woman's eye here. This is her chin down here. She does have a headscarf on, but it's positioned differently. She's looking more directly to the side, whereas the young woman is looking away from you, mostly. So for the young woman, I presume most of you can see the young woman. This is her chin here. This is the young woman's ear, whereas it's the old woman's eye. This is the young woman's eye, but kind of her eyelash and her nose off here, looking the other direction. Can't really see her eye per se. Hearing some people trying to explain to somebody else how to see what's there. How many of you can see both pictures now? So about half the class still can't see both pictures yet. Again, the point of the first picture was to help you see the young woman in this picture, but still some of you, it jumped out. The old woman jumped out at you as the obvious picture, the dominant picture. And the old woman is the dominant picture in this drawing. But the idea was to prep your mind to see the young woman. So if you can't see both of them yet, then again, this is the power of a paradigm. This is what you're expecting to see something. Sometimes it's very difficult to see anything else. Our I'm going to show you part of a video, not today, but another time, of a number of things that we cannot see, that our minds fool us on. Even when we know it, we can't see it. Our minds are not perfect, and there are some things that they just we just cannot see. Even if we know it's true, we cannot see it. Um, and so there's a psychologist that will watch his video. He's what's his I forget exactly what he calls himself, but he's uh, kind of a psychologist of economics. I forget what he calls himself, but anyway, he then transitions from visual, um, visual things that our minds can't handle to economic things that our minds can't handle. And he points out that actually a big share of our brain is for things that are visual. So if our if we can be fooled by something visual, then actually it's more likely we can be fooled by other things, by concepts that we just don't get, that our minds can't quite grasp, and they can lead to bad decisions. And he goes through some economic decisions that most people make based on bad rationale. They just don't get it, and they are kind of fooled by the context of what they're trying to understand. So when you have a paradigm shift, it is a little bit. Sometimes we call it the aha experience. Um, I was thinking, no, I don't guess I talked about it here. There's a writer from the 1960s that talks about revolutions in science, and how science, even though it's supposed to be the hard science, that's where you really get knowledge. You can't fool people in hard science, but over the years, yeah, you do. You find out, people thought the world was flat, and then they figure, oh no, it's not flat. And then they realize it was round. Okay, that's round, but they're still thinking that the sun revolves around the earth. And then it takes another aha experience to realize that that no, the earth revolves around the sun. And those scientific revolutions have taken place over sometimes centuries. In fact, people have been put to death over having a different paradigm of science that some state religion would not accept. They say, you're an idiot, and you're such an idiot, we're going to put you to death because you're teaching false doctrine that the earth is round and not flat. You're teaching a false doctrine that the sun and the stars don't revolve around the earth. So you deserve to die. So it's become even complicated with religions through the centuries, and people have died for having the right concept of reality. But hopefully we can have aha experiences, that we are open enough to have those aha experiences. I think I mentioned in class already that I enjoy, even though I don't accept them all, I enjoy watching scientists who study quantum physics talk about their ideas. Now, I happen to disagree with some, sometimes based on my religion, which maybe my religion's wrong, right? Religion is one of the paradigms that we live with. So some of the things they teach about quantum physics seems kind of bizarre. On the other hand, some things they're teaching about quantum physics actually kind of reinforce my thinking. Or not just quantum physics. I was watching a video the other day by three mathematicians. I don't think they're all mathematicians. Anyway, I think two of them are mathematicians and one was a scientist from some other field. But they figured out, based on DNA and how quickly things can evolve through changes in DNA, and how frequently those DNA changes result in nothing, if perhaps death, in fact, of whatever DNA change has happened. But it takes a very long time and lots of kind of mistakes made by changes in DNA to actually make something, an entire species change. And so they've decided that there's uh, there's no way that Darwin's theory of evolution is correct. It just simply doesn't work. And a lot of their colleagues are hating them for this, but it's not for a religious reason. None of them, well, one of them might be religious. One of the three does believe that the only theory that he can come up with at this point, now that all three of them have books and stuff published saying that Darwin can't be right based on science that we have now. So one of them believes in intelligent design. That's what he would say instead of God. That somebody, something more intelligent than us designed this world. And that's kind of, well, and then the other two wouldn't say that. They were, I think they're atheists, and so they said, no, we can't accept that. And then the interviewer said, well, what is your best other theory if it's not Darwin's evolution? And they had no answer for it. We don't know. We have to keep looking. So that one, from a religious perspective, from my perspective, I'd say, aha, we got you. But that's also kind of what the quantum theorists are saying, is the quantum theorists are saying it's too perfect. And so, like I say, they're that one, some researchers in Seattle have gotten millions of dollars to study, to try to catch the intelligent designer in an error. Because in a video game or in a computer game, not all options are available. Therefore, if an intelligent being created us in a computer game type setting, then they should find him making shortcuts somewhere. There's nobody so smart they wouldn't have to take a shortcut, but they haven't done that yet. But anyway, so paradigms. However you want to look at it, whether it's a religious paradigm, a scientific paradigm, every so often you're going to have aha experience and have to say, wait a second, that's not the way I saw things. And scientifically that's true. Religiously it may be true. Socially it may be true. Educationally it's I would hope that's true. That educationally you will have these aha experiences that change the way you see things and help you. That they change the way you think in a positive way. I just mentioned this already. I mean, here you had this geocentric philosophy, and it took a major scientific revolution for the world to accept that Earth was not the center of the universe, and that wasn't that long ago. That they finally had that aha experience, and they had that scientific experience, that they could realize that just because it looks like the sun is going around us, it isn't. We're going to, our Earth is turning around, and we're having that experience, but it's not what we thought it was. Anyway, another cartoon again. Covey's theories have become just part of Western society anyway, if not here. And so they make cartoons about it. So they're seeing and being. What we see is highly interrelated to what we are. Paradigms are powerful because they create the lens through which we see the world. So, again, the way we think the world should be, that we think is normal, is not necessarily normal. And one of those things that people think, again, is that they are what they are, they can't change. And that's one of the first things that Dr. Covey tries to fight, is the idea that you can't change your paradigm, that you can't change the way you are, whatever it might be. Whether your parents did something that made make you do something that isn't acceptable to society, like beating your children or whatever excessively, whatever that might be, whatever you have whatever paradigm that you have now can be changed if you choose to change it. It does take will to do that. We'll talk more about being proactive and how that works next week. So I mentioned he believes in a principle-centered paradigm, that there are certain truths that most religions teach, but even outside of religion, he thinks these are the keys to success. For example, you're going to be if you're a fair person, if you believe in being fair, people around you are going to trust you more. If you act on being fair in whatever position you're in, if you become an executive and you go out of your way to be fair to your employees, if you're a parent and you're going out of your way to be fair to your children, to your spouse, whatever. Um, Fairness is one of those principles that we tend to understand, and everybody seems to accept it, although not everybody lives it. Not everybody is fair, but they know, they have a sense that that is appropriate. At least our society tells us that, if they themselves have rejected it. Integrity and honesty. These two are kind of interrelated. Integrity kind of suggests oneness, that you are what you appear to be, that you're not two-faced, is what we would call it in at least American English, that you are one thing in public and another thing in private, being two-faced, or being two-faced even in a social sense. You are one thing to one person and something, and you're somebody else to somebody else because you're adapting yourself to somehow manipulate other people. And so you do not have integrity. You are, again, two-faced. You are just pretending to be what you think will help you be successful in whatever circumstance you're at. That's not having integrity, if that's the way you are. And honesty is kind of the same thing, but obviously we think of honesty of not stealing and stuff like that. But it certainly is, very closely related to integrity. If we pretend to be honest and we're not honest, if we pretend to do our job and instead we're actually sitting in our office playing video games, then then we're not displaying integrity or honesty. Human dignity. The idea is that all people have um, their value. That we don't look down on people uh, for because they have a different skin color, because they have a different belief system. We don't look down on them and conclude that one of the terms is objectify them. Think of them as objects rather than people. That it doesn't matter if we kill the Jews because they're not, because they're evil, and so we objectify this whole body of people, essentially like the Nazis did, and killed a million of them. They're just cockroaches. They've taken advantage of us, so let's get rid of them. Whatever group, a lot of the Southerners, the KK, the Ku Klux Klan in America, objectified the African Americans and hung many of them, and so committed other atrocities, because to them they were not human. They were just uh, whatever. They were subhuman, and so they felt justified in doing anything they wanted to them. So part of the principle is, one of the principles he believes is eternal and should be universal, is human dignity, to accept that everybody has value. Um, Kind of skipping down to the last one, potential, and it kind of relates to human dignity, and that is that every human has potential of being much more than they are. They have potential of being of great service to society. Um, I think I mentioned, well, yeah, I'm going to talk about next week. I'm going to talk about, I'll give you a good example of that. But I think I already talked, I think, in class about my nephew who has, like a 60 IQ or whatever. But he doesn't know how to read and write. He's over 40 years old. He can't read or write, but he has a really sharp memory for things about nature, and he loves nature, and he loves animals. And he's never going to be a scientist because he can't read or write. But he's a value. So there are things important to him, and he likes to share those things with other people. His life is different than my life, but he has value. Despite his limitations, he has value. And his mind works differently, obviously, and he knows much more about animals and stuff than I do. I was good in science. I took a lot of biology classes, but he just lives to watch TV shows about nature and different animals around the world and the environments they live in and so forth. And he knows a lot more than I do now. And then going back to service, and that is the principle of helping other people. That if we see people that they have dignity, they have value, and they have potential, then it's a principle he believes that we should try to help other people achieve their potential, and be their best selves. Whether that's somebody that is close to us, like somebody in our own family, such as my nephew, for example, how to help him to achieve his greatest potential, whatever that might be, or whether somebody we don't know at all, whether somebody we have a hard time relating to, that is different, is from a different culture, different religion, different race, whatever, and we may have a hard time relating to them, but that we can feel enough empathy and sympathy, whatever the case might be, to be of service to others. That this has value. Being of service is of value. One of the things we that we talked about in our student leadership program was what we called service leadership, sometimes called servant leadership. But the idea that you become a leader by being of service, that's something I really believe in. Being a leader by being of service. And I give examples sometimes. For example, when I first moved to Kazakhstan and took my university job there about 12 years ago, I was getting adjusted to a new country, getting adjusted to a country that was dominated by Islamic religion, getting accustomed to a new university that I'd never taught at before, just having to make some changes in my life and my own paradigm, which is one reason why I like to travel around the world, is I like to have my paradigm challenged a little bit, and it's of value to me. But anyway, so somebody sent out an email about getting involved with a research conference, what they called the KEMEP. It was the name of the university, KEMEP University, KEMEP International Research Conference. And I figured, well, I have a little bit extra time. I'll go ahead and volunteer. And so I did. And they had typically the research conference was developed by the business college of business, and I was in the College of Social Sciences. And so the College of Business organized the thing, and they oversaw it. It was their baby. And so but nonetheless, they invited other people to participate in the planning committee, and I decided to do so. And as they had things to do, I'd volunteer, my time to help out. And I never really thought about it. I just thought it was a good thing to do. And so I was shocked a little bit when we got to the very last planning meeting before the conference. And there were 12 people in the room, about 12. And the college, the chairman named off 7 things that had to be done before the conference. And he went down the list, and he asked me to do 4 of the things because they had to be done. And he asked the other 11 people to do 3 things. that's interesting. But it was because they had in that very short time in my first year there, they had realized when I say something, I do it. And they apparently didn't trust the other 11 people in the group to do it. And so when it came down to the last 7 things, they needed me to do 4 of them. I don't remember what those 4 were, but I mean, I did them. I just thought it was kind of funny that the other 11 people could only handle 3 things. But anyway, no big deal to me. And then the next, the day, I think it was the morning of, it was going to start in the afternoon. It was a multi-day conference. The morning of the conference, first I get a call from the chair of the planning committee and says, Ken, you have to be the MC. You have to run this big. They had a big meeting room like our auditorium is here now. This one, the one they had there, was about, I guess, about the same size as our new auditorium. Could handle, in that case, about 500 people. So anyway, they said, Ken, you have to run this meeting. I said, excuse me? Why do I have to run the meeting? You're the chair. You're the chair of the conference. You should run the meeting. He said, no, I can't do it. You have to do it, Ken. I guess so. I mean, it'd been nice to have some warning about this, and I'm not a real good MC, by the way. It does not come natural for me to suddenly get up and run something. I do a little bit of planning. You can tell by the way I teach. So this was kind of a shocker, but I'm also somebody who does not say no. I don't know how to say no. So I said yes. Then I get a call from the dean of the college, and he apparently didn't talk to the chair because he says, Ken, you have to be the MC of this meeting. Anyway, and so then I thought maybe I'd get out of it again. So I said, well, you are the dean of the department. You should run it. He said, no, Ken, you have to do it. Okay, whatever. So I went ahead and emceed their opening ceremonies, their opening thing. And afterwards, they had everybody gather outside. There was kind of some steps leading up to to their auditorium, and so I just naturally went to the last row, and people started yelling, Ken, get up here in the front. You're the leader of this thing. Ken, come up to the front. I said, I'm not the leader of anything. I just showed up and said yes to everything you asked me to do, but I'm not the leader of this. And so I stayed in the back row. But it was interesting to me. It made me think about this idea of service leadership. Not because I wanted to go, well, I'm cool, because it was just it was those paradigm shifts that made me think it really is true that you can become a leader by just saying yes. You can start off by putting the chairs away at the end of the meeting or whatever. But once somebody over you realizes they can depend on you, they will naturally bring you up because they can't depend on other people. And so the more they can feel like they can trust you, then you will move up, even if you don't want to. In fact, that would be something I'll talk about. I think it is in the next meeting, next class also, about how after a while people start, because you are so programmed to say yes, you have to learn to say no. You have to force yourself sometimes because your area of influence becomes bigger than your sphere of concern. And so suddenly you have people from outside your sphere of concern asking you to help them with stuff that you don't really care about. And that means you take time for the stuff you really do care about. So you actually do have to train yourself to say no sometimes, which is hard for me to do. But so this idea of service leadership, I do believe in strongly. Not just from that experience, but then I start relating it to a lot of other experiences I had and had the same sort of results. Even though, again, I wasn't seeking leadership. When people trust you, they push you into that position of leadership regardless. And that does not mean, for example, that you're necessarily the best person for it. I'll give you an example next week of a person who is more like my nephew, who changed an entire organization by his willingness to do something, to try to create change. And so well, I'll share this kind of a highlight for next week. Dr. Covey, the next class is about being proactive. And Dr. Covey says somebody who is proactive can be 5,000% more effective than somebody who's not proactive. And when I read that, in my mind, thought, you're crazy. But then I started thinking, and I'll show you an example next week. Maybe Farrah Gray may be an example of that, right? I mean, he became a millionaire when he was 14 by being proactive, by wanting to make his family life better, help his mom. He became a millionaire at age 14. Was he smart? Yeah, I'd say he's smart, but he's still 14. How many 14-year-olds do you know that become millionaires and live in the inner city in poverty and can do that? I don't know anybody. I haven't met somebody yet other than knowing the story of Farrah Gray. But I have seen people make have tremendous contributions because of that one trait of being proactive and be willing to say yes and to do it, to be trustworthy. So anyway, these are the principles that Dr. Covey talks about as being some of the foundation of principles that will help you be success if you live by the principles. So this is part, again, of what he considers inside-out change, is that if you learn these if you become these principles, in a sense, if you don't just believe in them, but you become them, these become part of your character. And that, indeed, that's what he kind of talks about a transition. At first you may just do things, you do them, but it's you might be doing it for the wrong reason even, but you do them. And pretty soon, if you do something long enough, what happens? What happens if you do something long enough? It becomes a habit, right? So suddenly it transitions from just doing something to making it a habit. And scholars say that it can take, if it's something you do every day, you can build a habit in 1 month to where you no longer even think about it. It becomes something you do habitually. And I've habitualized some of my habits or some of my things I want to accomplish to where I don't think about them. Anyway, I'll go into those details another time. But you build a habit, and he says basically, so actually these are actions, we'll put that in those terms. So the sum of your actions become your habits. And the sum of your habits become your character. So your character, your inside out self, is the sum of your habits, which are the sum of your actions. And so you can choose to change your character by starting with your actions, which change your habits, which change then your character. An inside out transformation. You've probably heard this quote before. It's quite famous. The significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. And that's also kind of with changing our paradigm and making a transition in the way that we approach life. Is that we cause ourselves problems, and if we want to get out of those, if we want to be alleviated from the problems of our life, we may have to totally change the way we think. We need a new paradigm. And so this is Dr. Covey's habits. A lot of people that, like the video said, have been paying $500 million a year because he has shown success in helping people recreate themselves. So it's an inside-out change. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit, Aristotle said. Habits require knowledge, they require skill, they require desire, and ultimately they require the action to continue to with our knowledge, with some skill we may have to develop, with a desire, then we just do it. Do it, do it, do it until it becomes a habit. In brief, he talks about 7 habits. And starting off, the very first one up there that we'll talk about next week is to be proactive. I'm just going to go through these very quickly. The second one will be begin with the end in mind, and the third one will be put first things first. And these 3 constitute what he considers the private victory. You have to learn how to control yourself first. Control the way you approach life, control your paradigm, control your make a decision where you want to go, and then on a day-to-day basis, make the right decisions on how you spend your time. Everybody has 24 hours a day. Nobody has more. Nobody has less, unless they die. But you have those 24 hours a day, and some people will use those well, and some will not. And so your proactivity means that you feel like you can control your destiny. You're then deciding what the end you want, where is it you want to go in life, and then how to control your time so that you can effectively get where you want in the time that you want to get there. The next 3 relate to, so the first one is a private victory, an inner victory. The second 3 are for a public victory. How do you work with other people? And he says that actually a lot of us think that our greatest goal is to become independent. He said, but that's not the greatest success. Our greatest success is achieved by becoming interdependent. That is, we achieve greater success by learning how to work with other people. And so he talks about thinking win-win. Don't be afraid that other people succeed as you succeed. And indeed, as I was saying with my example of the conference, a year or so later, they asked me to be the chairman. I was the first person who was not part of the School of Business, the College of Business, to become the chair. And I was chair for 2 years, and it was very successful, and it led to lots of other very positive things in my life. As I got to know leaders of the country, ambassadors, and people like that, as chair of that research conference. So anyway, thinking win-win, okay, I can help the chairman win by doing my job, and being a service leader, a servant leader, whatever, and then they will help lift you up. The habit 5 is seek first to understand, then to be understood. You need to understand other people before you can really achieve win-win. You can think win-win, you can accept that as a paradigm, that it doesn't hurt me if you win. We can both win, but you have to understand them before you can really seek that win-win solution to whatever it might be. So sometimes I think it should be the other way around. It should be seek first to understand, then to be understood, then think win-win. In the actual, his point is that you have to think win-win before you can before it becomes imperative for you to understand people from what their perspective is and learn how to work with them. But these 3 intermix with each other. And the last one in achieving the public victory is to synergize. And synergy is basically where 1 + 1 = 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10. It's where you work together, you brainstorm, you come up with new ideas, and the pie that you thought you were going to divide suddenly is much bigger than it was before, because now you've come up with new ideas to make it bigger. And so each of you now are not only win-winning, but you're win-winning in a much bigger way than either of you thought was possible, because you synergized in doing it. And the last one, represented by the circle around it, is to sharpen the saw, and that is basically always improving yourself and refreshing your skills and so forth. And anyway, we're going to take one of these every week in the next 7 weeks. and talk about each of these one at a time, and hopefully help you to start developing those habits. You can also think of this um, this paradigm that he's created, this graphic, as also suggesting a growth in you might say your maturity continuum. That you start off as a baby being dependent on everybody else, but some people remain dependent on other people for a long time. They don't stop being dependent on other people, and so anyway, I'm going to have to stop here because you guys have a quiz to do. And so I will probably come back and review the last part of the slideshow next week when we do that one. I'm going to stop here. Your quiz is now open.